Good evening and welcome to the Ogden City Council meeting for Tuesday, July 30th, 2013. Let the roll call reflect that all council members are present. We'll now turn the time over to Vice Chair Garner for the Pledge of Allegiance.
We'd like to welcome with us tonight Benjamin McCraw from Troop 293, and we'll ask him to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll ask him to stay at the podium and we'll have him tell a little bit why he's here.
Will everyone please join me in saluting and pledging allegiance to our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, I am Benjamin McCraw from Troop 293. I'm Star Scout, and I'm working on the Merit Badge Citizenship in the Community.
Thank you, Benjamin, and we appreciate your leaders being here with you tonight, and wish you well in your endeavors to pursue your eagle.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'd ask that you all join us in observing a moment of silence. Thank you. First up, we have two recognitions. First is Joint Resolution 2013-14 honoring Weber State University track and field and cross-country athlete Amber Henry. Councilmember Wicks.
Thank you, Chair Blair. This is a joint resolution of the Ogden City Council and Mayor. It's number 2013-14, and it is honoring Weber State University track and field cross-country athlete Amber Henry. And it reads as follows. Whereas Amber Henry completed a remarkable 2012-2013 season in track and field and cross-country, achieving multiple records at both university and conference levels. Her diligence and persistence throughout the season allowed her to be named the 2012-2013 Weber State University Female Athlete of the Year. And whereas Amber grew up on a cattle ranch in the small town of Mountain View, Wyoming. She was very involved and participated in volleyball, basketball, and track during her middle and high school years. In 2009, she graduated from Mountain View High School, having won 15 individual state titles and setting the state record for the 800-meter run in both the 2A and 3A classifications. And whereas in 2010, Amber began attending Weber State and participating in collegiate track and cross country. She's been an exceptional contributor to these programs and has had a number of significant accomplishments over the past 3 years. And whereas this year Amber had a phenomenal success and earned first-team All-American honors by finishing third overall in the steeplechase at the NCAA Championships. During this event, she posted her career best time and achieved the second best time in Weber State history. She also became the 10th athlete in the conference history to win 3 events in one meet, taking first place in the steeplechase, 1,500 meters, and 5,000 meters, and setting stadium records in all 3 events. Whereas she earned All-American honors in cross-country, making her an All-American twice in 1 year. During the cross-country season, she was named Big Sky champion for the second time and earned All-American honors by finishing 32nd at the NCAA Championships. Amber also led the cross-country team to conference and mountain region titles. And Amber has not only excelled in her athletic pursuits, but also academically. She received Big Sky Conference and All-District academic honors for maintaining a 3.88 GPA in nursing at Weber State, and also earned academic All-American honors for the first time in her career. And whereas Amber Henry has become one of the most decorated runners in Weber State history. She received All-American honors for 2 consecutive years and is a 9-time Big Sky individual champion. She also finished 6th overall in the USA Championship events while competing against the top professional and collegiate athletes in the nation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Ogden City Council and Mayor Michael P. Caldwell hereby congratulate Amber Henry for her incredible success both in and outside of the classroom. We are confident that she will continue to succeed and make our community proud as she pursues her dream of one day competing in the Olympics. So, She's really fast and really smart. So with that, I would make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2013-14.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks to adopt Joint Resolution 2013-14 and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes. Congratulations.
And we have with you.
Well, I want to shake your hand, Amber. My daughter's jealous. That's all she wanted for Christmas was an Amber Henry autograph.
Thanks.
And
Amber, would you like to say something, or your coaches like to say something? We'd love to hear from you.
Sorry, yes. We'll put you on the spot a little bit.
I just want to thank the City of Ogden for the continual support for Weber State academic and athletics. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to accomplish this. This is a very big honor, and I appreciate it. And I just want to do everything I can to help build the community and support and show that what you guys do for us is really a blessing. And I appreciate it, and I appreciate all my coaches and my family and everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You.
congratulations.
Can I do a picture?
Your family and your coaches come up and get a
We're going to have your group right here in front of us.
How are you? Good, how are you? I try to make sure everybody's in the... Okay. Sorry, it's hard. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
That Coach Blaisdell's more handsome than I am anyway.
We'd love to hear from either coach also. We'd love.
Coach, do you want to say a few
Coach, do
words?
you want to say a few words? We'd love to hear from the coaches also.
Well, I have Coach Pilkington do this. I'm the director of track and field at Weber State, and Coach Pilkington's our distance coach, and he's just done a wonderful job of helping Amber to keep raising each year a higher level, and we appreciate her very much. She's a farm gal, as you heard, and she's not afraid to go out and move irrigation pipe and ride horses and do all the things that you do on a cattle ranch, and she's not afraid to work. And in our sport of track and field, you've got to work. And so we appreciate Amber and all her hard work. She's just a great representative of Weber State, not only athletically but academically. And we appreciate all of you in inviting Amber down and giving her this honor tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next is a joint proclamation for Attendance Awareness Month. Councilmember Gochner.
I'll give you guys a second to clear out. Don't feel like you have to stay. But Amber, I want to say, I think you've kind of blown by me on the trails a time or two in a cloud of dust.
She's blown by just about everybody.
Okay, and I guess before I get started on this one, I just want to say this has been a wonderful collaboration between Ogden City and the Voices for Utah Children. I know Tracy Gruber is here, and the Ogden School District, and we've got the Ogden School Board President, Shane, and Donna Corby here. So I think this is a great testament to what collaboration can bring. So here it is. This is a joint proclamation of Ogden City and the Ogden School District proclaiming September 2013 as Attendance Awareness Month in Ogden City. Whereas Ogden City officials and the Ogden School District recognize the important role that education plays in the lives of our children. Educational institutions make valuable learning opportunities available for students to obtain knowledge and become an integral part of our community. And whereas we recognize the importance of student attendance at school and are supportive of the efforts of our schools to improve attendance. These efforts help to ensure that students are able to fully utilize the valuable learning opportunities available to them. And whereas chronic absence, missing 10% or more of school per year for any reason, including excused and unexcused, beginning in kindergarten is a proven predictor of academic trouble and dropout rates. And whereas it is critical for students, parents, and our community as a whole to be aware of the significance of regular school attendance. Good attendance is an essential part of student achievement and graduation, and whereas student absences can be significantly reduced when schools, parents, and the community work together to promote good attendance and help to address challenges that keep children from getting to and staying in school. Now, therefore, the Ogden City Council, Mayor, and the Ogden School District hereby proclaim September 2013 as Attendance Awareness Month in Ogden City. We encourage parents, family, friends, and community partners to support our local schools in their efforts by reaching out to students that have attendance challenges. In addition, we encourage our community to strive for less than one absence, excused or unexcused, per academic quarter for every student. And with that, I'll make a motion to adopt this joint proclamation.
I second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Gochner to adopt this joint proclamation and a second from Councilmember Stevens. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes.
Mr. Chair, I think this is an example of how the council is actually, and Ogden City is working with the Ogden School District to support each other and to strengthen our education program. Education is very important so that we can train our youth for the job levels and the experiences that they may have. So it's just a joint effort in that aspect.
I agree. We'd love to invite school board or the school district board president Shane Story or Tracy Gruber to say a few words, or both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. The proclamation really clearly establishes what we are trying to do from Voices for Utah Children. We're part of a national campaign that's trying to raise awareness and impress upon parents and students the importance of being in school on a regular basis and the strong relationship that being in school every day really does make a difference for academic achievement and will help our kids, particularly our lower income children who seem to struggle with this at a much greater degree, have the supports that they need to make sure that they're in school. We know that based on a research by the University of Utah, that 13.5% of Utah's students are chronically absent from school. And that study also showed that this has led to higher dropout rates and poorer performance on standardized tests and lower proficiency in reading. So this really is a great statement from the City of Ogden and shows great support to the Ogden School District that has made this a priority. So thank you very much for your support of this proclamation.
I would just like to say thank you and appreciate your support of the proclamation of the Ogden School District. We know that as the city progresses, education needs to progress as we all strive to get people to want to live in Ogden. In regards to attendance, Chronic absenteeism isn't our high school kids sloughing. It starts as young as kindergarten. And we can track chronic absentee students as kindergarten and first grade and see that we will have trouble with those children as they move through high school. So it starts as the youngest. I also would like to say that it isn't just the low-income families that we have challenges with, as we have some higher-income families that feel that it's important to take their kids on vacations instead of be in school, and it does affect them also. So as we start the school year, we say thank you for helping us as we begin September and focusing on education and attending school, as we know that's where the success begins with our students. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next up is approval of minutes. First is the minutes of the work session of September 18th, 2012 and January 15th, 2013. Councilmember Stevens.
Yes, Mr. Chair, those are correct.
And minutes of the joint study session and regular meeting of January 22nd, 2013, and the study session of February 26th, 2013. Councilmember Van Hoosier.
Chair Blair, I've reviewed these minutes and find them to be correct.
Minutes of the work session of January 22nd, 2013, and the closed session of May 7th, 2013. Councilmember Wicks.
Thank you, Chair Blair. I reviewed those and found them to be correct.
And the minutes of the work session of March 5th, 2013, the special meeting of May 14th, 2013, and the study session of May 21st, 2013. Councilmember Gochner.
I have reviewed those and found them to be accurate and would make a motion to approve all minutes.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to approve the minutes from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Wicks. This is a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes. Next, we have a public hearing, budget amendment, proposed ordinance 2013-38. Miss Laurie Johnson.
The purpose of this action is to transfer $60,000 of council planning funding from the CIP fund to the general fund and appropriate it to the city council professional and technical budget for the purpose of the management audit. So we request adoption of this ordinance in order to make that transfer. And it increases the fiscal budget by $60,000, fiscal year 14 budget. So this is the first change to the fiscal year 14 budget. Any questions? This is something all of you have been aware of, so thank you.
If there's no further discussion, I'll...
This is a public hearing.
Oh, sorry.
So we'll now accept
There is further discussion.
We'll now accept public input on the budget amendment.
Seeing no activity, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public hearing from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
And if there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt proposed ordinance 2013-38.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to adopt proposed ordinance 2013-38 from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Vice Chair Garner. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier? Aye. Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes. Next up are reports from administration. First is the utility bond parameters. Again, Ms. Laurie Johnson. Is it?
Chair, we're going to have Mr. Stratford and Laurie.
Okay.
Chair Blair, members of the council. So the council staff has asked that I start off the discussion by having a bit of a review of how we got here. And then after that, then Laurie Johnson will provide further information about specifics dealing with numbers and financial information. And then I, as well as members of the water department and other end of the sewer and sanitary sewer and storm sewer, can answer questions or address other issues. And then at that point, Laura Lewis will be presenting the actual bond parameters resolution to you, and you can ask questions of her. in your council staff packet, there are about 6 questions that were raised by council staff, and we're not necessarily going to go through those 1 through 6 in order, but in the initial presentation, at least, I hope to address the first 2 questions, which include a review of the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan and the Joint Resolution 2012-3 that established preferred levels of cash on hand for each of the utilities. And then item number 3 can be answered by Laurie Johnson when she provides her information. So this process really began at least 5 to 6 years ago when the council undertook the Water Horizons project to try and get a handle on city infrastructure, primarily water infrastructure, but all utility infrastructure, and figure out how to get the city's system to a point that it was keeping up with the times, with the ability to provide services to the community and to do it in a way that was forward-looking. At that time, the council approved projects as well as a bond in the amount of $49 million to do the initial phase of that work. At that time, the council was clearly aware that that was not the end of the process, that $49 million was not going to fix all of the problems associated with the city's infrastructure system, and in particular the water system. And in fact, when the bond was issued, and I don't know how common this is in bonds, but if you read the official offering statement that went out with those bonds, it clearly said, this only deals with part of the problems that the city has identified. It does not address the issue of a water treatment plant in the canyon. And everybody knew at that point that that issue was going to have to come back and that it represented a significant financial investment that the city was going to have to be able to step up to. As time went along and those projects, those initial sets of projects were done and completed, the city got excellent value for that, was able to stretch that money further than had originally been anticipated, and you'll continue to receive updates on that information. But the city also went through a process of the water utility developing a water master plan, and shortly thereafter, at about the same time, engaging in a comprehensive financial sustainability plan to say, okay, we've made this good start, how are we going to build on that for the future? I don't know if you're looking at your packet or not, but on page 26 of your packet, which is also page 4 of the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan, there's a little sidebar quote that summarizes really what the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan was supposed to do. It says the purpose of the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan is to ensure that each utility remains functionally and fiscally viable into the future. And really, I think that involves 3 items. The first item is that the council wanted to see each system, whether it's water, storm sewer, or sewer, and they are treated as 3 different systems, which Laurie will address when she gets up, that they can maintain their own infrastructure systems using their own revenue. They were supposed to be able to stand alone and be able to operate as independent, and not really entities, but as independent systems. Second, that there was an underlying goal to achieve rate stability. And third, that there would be the ability to have the orderly provision of services. And really, I think these latter 2 points are very significant when you talk about the item before you today, which is approving a bond parameters resolution to do additional bonding, because we have to look at rate stability and what would happen if you didn't bond, and what would also happen to the orderly provision of services. To give you an idea or a refresher, because you've already seen this and approved this in the past, the Financial Sustainability Plan first identified the importance of using master planning and capital facility planning. And that process was completed at about the same time that the plan was adopted. And I've got to find the right sheet here so I can give you the correct numbers. And at that time, the water utility, this is just looking for years 1 through 10, because the master plan for water had about a 40-year outlook on costs and how much infrastructure was going to need to be built and replaced over those 40 years. And in fact, it really looks out 100 years, but that's so far out that you can't really do it. And then shortly thereafter, you approved a partial master plan for the stormwater system to address issues dealing with capacity. And in the next few months, you will be reviewing the sanitary sewer master plan, which also has similar long-term projections. So when you look at the water plan, in the next 10 years, or the first 10 years of that plan, there are almost $47 million in projects over a 10-year period. In the storm sewer, just for the capacity issues, not addressing issues related to potential the other fitness of the pipe and whatnot, there are $12.2 million in projects in the first 10 years. And even in the sanitary sewer area, where we didn't have a master plan at that time, but they were able to project out, there was a projection of about $4.5 million of projects. And as you'll see when you get the master plan in the next few weeks or month, there's actually a proposal for about $7.5 million of projects in the next 10 years. When you look at all three of those utilities together, you're talking about $63.4 million in needed work in 10 years. And so you can ask yourself, $63.4 million, cash on hand, ability to pay for all of that out of our own pocket, probably going to be fairly difficult, which actually ties into to kind of the second point that the Comprehensive Financial Sustainability Plan raised, and that was the importance of having financial and management policies, and directly ties into the Joint Resolution 2012-3, which you adopted just a little bit more than a year ago. And it reiterates some of the things we've already been talking about, reiterates the need for each utility to pay its own way, also the need for revenue sufficiency. But in regards to the discussion we're having tonight, it makes two important points. First of all, when it comes to the question of debt, the principles adopted in that resolution recognize that city utilities should, as a rule, pay for capital projects with cash rather than through borrowing. When debt is proposed, the utility should seek the lowest amount of debt to achieve the necessary goal with the lowest borrowing cost available. Okay, so that's important in figuring out, okay, is the parameters resolution that's before you, how do you want to handle that? Because we have a goal to not borrow if we don't have to. But, and this is, I think, a point that I really want to emphasize throughout the entire presentation, is that there's always, you can't pull on one thing without something else having an effect on it. It's a fabric that's all woven together, and you can't just pick one piece out of it and ignore the fact that that affects the entire fabric. So the not exactly the opposing point, but the other point that needs to be kept in mind is that in those financial principles, there was a statement about city utilities maintaining adequate cash on hand in order to meet emergency and other unanticipated needs. And for the water utility, cash on hand was not to be less than 150 days, but that the council really actually wanted there to be 180 days of cash on hand in the water utility, and that the other city utilities should have 360 days of cash on hand. Some people can question, I suppose, why is it that we want to have cash on hand? If we have cash, why don't we spend it? Why don't we use it? Because it's available. And there are actually several different reasons why cash on hand matters. First of all, we talked about one of those principles being rate stability. There's always the potential that you can see a decrease in revenue. for a variety of reasons, weather reasons, and in fact, even if there was some kind of an emergency where water was not available for some period of time, you could see a substantial decrease in revenue to the system when that service is not available because people aren't using it, they're not going to have to pay for it. And so by having cash on hand, you're able to address decreases in revenue. You're also able to absorb increases in normal operating costs. If it turns out that your 5-year projection, which is another one of your principles, is that 5-year projection isn't off, rather than having to raise rates to immediately cover that, you're able to absorb some of those ups and downs. Third item has to do with emergency expenditures. And we can address this probably a little bit later after Laurie Johnson's presentation, but the concept of we need to have some resiliency in the event that there is some kind of a problem in the system that is unexpected and needs to be addressed. And then, really, I think, I don't know if it's least in importance, but there is the concept of how does that affect your ability to borrow funds when you need to borrow funds. And a question about what rating agencies look at when they are evaluating, because when we want to issue a bond, we say, okay, we're the lowest possible bond amount for the need that we have, but it's still going to be some amount, and there's a question out there to the investor, to the person who's buying that bond: how safe is this investment? How sure am I to get paid? The safer they feel, the lower the interest rate that the city has to pay on that, the lower total cost you have to issue that bond, or at least to carry that bond through until it's completely paid off. And so bond rating agencies, independent rating agencies, look at our system, evaluate it, and look at a variety of criteria to determine what rating to give us, which directly then plays into what you're going to have to pay in an interest rate and who is going to be interested. And they don't do that just to be brutal or just to cause problems. I mean, what they're looking at is this system set up in a way that an investor is likely to actually get paid at the end of the day. And so what they look at is there good financial management? And one of the issues of good financial management is your ability to cover these kinds of unexpected and unanticipated expenses. And so if you go out and say, well, it's fiscally responsible to spend our cash and we do that first, it's not just that the bond agency or the rating agency would look at that as a negative, it's that's not good financial management. It's really not a wise way to run a system. And so we don't, I think when people emphasize the borrowing rate, or when they emphasize the bondability, it's not an indication that we need to do this in order to take more debt on. It's not this kind of a circular reasoning that we need to save money in order to bond. It's that when bonds are required, because we don't have sufficient cash in the system, are we getting the best deal, which is exactly what we've said we're trying to do in our financial principles. And I suppose that, I don't know if I need to go into a lot more into the purpose of bonding, except that there is a risk associated with saying, I'm going to put off bonding until I have enough money to do certain projects. Some projects absolutely need to show restraint, need to wait until we can pay for those. Other projects, however, for a variety of reasons, it makes sense to bond rather than to pay for them in cash. And I think the treatment plant actually probably falls in several of these categories. But for example, use of long-term capital, use of bonding, actually is a better match between the customer charges and who uses the facilities. The current building has been in place, I think, for 60 years, and people have enjoyed it for 60 years. The new plant is going to be there, hopefully, for at least another 60 years. Well, if we make everybody pay for that today, then we have somebody today paying for infrastructure that's going to be enjoyed by somebody many years down the road. And so bonding actually helps to spread out the cost to all of the people who are using the system. Now, granted, there's debt costs associated with that, but the point is it's spreading it out over the people who are enjoying the benefit of it. Also, and I think this is significant for our city, the use of bonding allows existing customers to continue to receive the same level of service they've historically received. If we were to take 2 years off, and that's why I wanted to start off with the statement about how much our need is. If we were to take 2 years off of this $46 million that water needs and just push that out in order to save for a single facility, we have the potential that people are going to see losses in service levels while we're doing that. And you have to say, is that really justified to put people at risk of losing service levels because of pressure, of fire flow, of the kinds of things that can be covered a little bit later about the system condition, in order to pay by cash when we can see perfectly justifiable reasons why we would need to bond? And so I think with that introduction, I don't know if you have any questions for me about how we got here or any of the financial principles I've discussed.
I have something. What would you consider a reasonable amount to have on hand for emergency expenditures?
I don't know if you can break it down into a specific number, because the amount of cash on hand that's in the financial principles brings into account all of the variety of reasons why you need cash on hand. And so I don't think that there's a single industry standard that says exactly what that's got to be, partially because of the size of your system. For example, our storm sewer is the smallest of the three utilities. In order for it to absorb some kind of a problem, it actually needs probably a greater number of days of cash on hand than maybe the water utility does, because a hit to the storm utility system is going to wipe that out quicker. And so my answer is that the financial principles that were adopted last year are what is reasonable. And I think it would, for at least two reasons, be a mistake to go against those. First of all, because this council reviewed those, found those adequate at the time, and approved them. But second of all, the council made a statement to the world, essentially, that said, we're going to follow these principles. And if we intentionally don't follow that principle, somebody comes in and looks at our system and says, how's your system operating? Oh, you announced a principle, then you decided not to follow it. Well, how much confidence does that give me that I'm going to be able to rely on you continuing to make good decisions in the future?
Numbers vague. I mean, I'm just asking what is a reasonable amount to have on hand, say, in the water utility for emergency? I mean, do we know what some of these things typically cost? I think, are expecting maybe $1.4 million for the situation at the mouth of the canyon where we had the mudslide. I think it would be pretty reasonable to come up with some sort of number for those utilities to figure out, what is a big, disaster and how much would it cost to deal with it.
I think a common standard is to say, what's your single most expensive piece of infrastructure? And that you should have enough to replace the single most expensive piece of infrastructure, which I believe in the water department is the treatment plant, which is going to be $13 million.
But if the treatment, people have mentioned, the treatment plant failing because Pineview fails or whatever. I mean, that would be federal disaster type situation, wouldn't it? I mean,
I don't
any
think
of those large failures, like anything like that, I realize that's the largest piece that we have within the system, but there are a lot of, and the likelihood of that happening is probably quite small, and the likelihood that we'd have to cover the full expense with that is quite small. I'm talking pieces within the system that we may have to replace, and what's a reasonable number.
So I think it's highly unlikely, and in fact, it's impossible to plan for a failure of that magnitude. There's no way, because see, again, this is the balancing. If you wanted to be 100% safe, you'd say, well, let's have 1,000 days of cash on hand. Let's have as much as possible. That would be unreasonable. And so the concept of some kind of failure of Pineview Dam is, I think, so remote that should be completely discounted.
Yeah.
But if you look at other systems that we have within the utility, I hope I get the numbers right, but other significant investments that could be a serious problem and could happen for a variety of reasons. So the treatment plant, there could be vandalism. There could be, some kind of intentional act by somebody to cause problems with that, and you would have to go address that. But
wouldn't that be insured, though? I mean, don't we have insurance on these
No.
buildings for things like that?
No.
We don't.
Sure.
We're self-insured for that type of thing.
Right.
Okay.
But you look at individual water tanks, for example. 46th Street is a pretty good example. There are 2 water tanks up there. If something were to happen and one of those water tanks were to be lost, the most recent water tanks that we have replaced have been in the range of $3 to $5 million to construct a new water tank. Well, if there was something that happened to one of those water tanks, you're looking at, just for that one project, $3 to $5 million. If we lose a well that somehow it collapses, has some kind of internal problem, you may be able to re-drill in that same location, but very likely you're going to have to drill a new hole, equip the new hole with infrastructure. You're talking $1.5 million for those kinds of things. So there are other significant infrastructure items out there that you need to be able to be in a position to address if something unexpected happens, in addition to the other variety of things that are out there.
Mark,
Mr. Chair?
Can I? Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me, I just wanted to mention, so the 180 days standard, isn't that designed to address that in some way?
Yes, that's one of the uses that money would be available for. It would be to address those. My understanding of Ms. Wick's question is that if we have $10 million, are we really going to have a $10 million problem? And I think the answer is it doesn't take too much, not even counting a major natural disaster, that would call upon that funding to be available. I hope that answers.
I would like to go what Mr. Cook was alluding to. If we had 150 days and 180 days and 360, what amount of money is constituted in those 3 situations? How much money would we have 150 days?
Laurie Johnson will answer that in detail.
Okay.
When she gets up, and I'd rather have her answer that than me get it wrong.
Can I ask, it goes along with that, what Amy or Councilmember Wicks is asking, but let me ask you in a different way. So I think I understand that an industry standard is a tough thing to come up with. Would it be possible to come up with some sort of number where we benchmark, like say, here's what cities of our similar size have done? And I think it goes with what Mr. Cook is saying too. Is that benchmark then days of cash on hand, or is it something in addition to that? I mean, would it be possible? And maybe Laurie Johnson's the one to ask that question too, but.
I think that days of cash on hand is probably the most common example. There is one additional factor that we need to consider in a city like Ogden, and that is, even though all the progress we've made from 2008 to 2013, our infrastructure is old. We are not growing like certain other cities. And so it'd be easy to look at a city of similar size somewhere in Salt Lake County, southwest Salt Lake County, or even cities of bigger size than us that have over 100,000 people that are newer. And it would be very easy to look at them and say, well, they only have 60 or 90 days of cash on hand. Well, their system isn't over 60 years old on an average, or over 90 years old on average. Well, probably we're not over 90 years old, but it's not, as old as ours, and it's not as likely to have the problems that we know that we're going to be running into. And so maybe as we go through and we're implementing the master plan and we're starting to see progress, and we've been able to get onto the track of replacing 1.2% of our system every year, which is what the master plan goal is, because that allows us to replace our system about every 100 years. Well, maybe at some point you say, okay, we're far enough into this that we've figured out our power curve and we're really making progress, and so maybe we can bring this number down a little bit. Although I would be, I was going to say I would be surprised if less than 150 days was ever really, was ever really a safe number to go with.
I'd like to go to the element of borrowing money. You made a statement that if we wait 2 years to have enough cash on hand to complete a project, if we did the project today compared 2 years down the road, there are additional costs that are involved in that project, that maybe 2 years down the road, that project would cost us a little more than what it would be today.
Yes, and
It could go down too, though. I mean, who
Well-
knows what the, I mean, do you have a crystal ball? Because I don't.
Oh, I don't either.
I mean, we experienced reduced costs with this last bond, with the last set of bond projects we took on. And, I don't think that's going to happen again, but
I think the best that you can do are to get projections and to try and anticipate. We were highly fortunate in that, when we issued our bond, we didn't benefit from any kind of interest rate reduction because we took out the bond before the economy had a kind of a downfall, but we did benefit from lower construction costs. And so currently today, construction costs have come back a little bit. I don't think there's any indication that construction costs are going to get lower in response to your question. And in fact, waiting to build up money, a lot of that can get eaten up in increased construction costs. And the other factor that's at play right now is that interest rates are still at a, not necessarily the historical lows, but extremely low levels. And again, people who do that for a living can address that a little bit better than I can. But that is an accurate point, that there's no guarantee that putting off a project while you try to save the money up is going to save you money.
But,
Mr. Stratford, one other thing you alluded to earlier, too, that we need to take into consideration of pushing things off is service. And one of the big things that we get pressure about is service to the public. We've heard about water pressure and other things, for many, many years on different projects. And as we improve those in areas, that improves. But we already know, even with the line coming down Ogden Canyon, there's some service issues that need to be addressed by this water plant.
Oh. And thank you. You may have seen the newspaper article a couple of days ago about water pressure in the canyon. So really the canyon water line is a three-part project. Phase 1 was replacing everything inside of the road. Phase 2 is the one you're going to hear about a little bit later tonight, which got accelerated because of a problem. But Phase 3 was addressing pressure issues at the top of the canyon. And quite honestly, a delay in completing the treatment plant means that we don't get to address those pressure problems. State code requires, or at least state regulation from the Division of Drinking Water, requires a minimum pressure of 20 pounds per inch at a service connection. Because of a variety of reasons, including additional safety factors by having backflow preventers in the canyon, in some cases we are not meeting that in the canyon at this time. And to continue that out longer, while that's maybe not our primary objective, is a problem in meeting the needs of those customers in our system. And getting that project done will fix that problem. So yes, that's correct. The other people who potentially suffer from service is, if you recall from the master plan, the first kind of large amount of money went to fire flow and storage issues. And you look at the areas where we know we have less than desirable fire flows. I think they're still adequate to fight fires, but they're not at the point where we would like them to be. Then we're telling those people, okay, we want you to continue, even though we have the capability to make this plan work, we're going to ask you to continue for another 2 years with the risk that there will be a fire in your neighborhood and you won't be able to address it as well as if we were actually implementing the plan. I'll turn the time over to Ms. Johnson.
Can I be just a very proud former Mount View High School graduate? Just let you know how proud I was of that young woman as she came up here. And most of you probably never been to Mount View, Wyoming, but it's not a very big place. My graduating class had 35 people in it, and I don't think hers had a whole lot more. And it is a little ranch community, and I grew up a ranch kid too. And to see that little girl come up here and having done so well, and I am so appreciative that you would recognize a little kid, from Mount View, Wyoming. Anyway, it does my heart proud, and I was just tickled to see her, and I know her grandparents, and that was just fun to see her up here. What I'd like to walk through you, thank you for letting me digress for just a few seconds. I'd like to walk through with you the fund balance data, how we got there, what our fund balances are, and then discuss with you what does 150 days mean with regard to dollars, what does 180 days mean, what does 360 days mean, and just let you know, so equate those days to actual dollars and numbers. So I'll try and, will this work from up here? Okay, so we'll walk through these slides and ask questions as we go. If I can make it work. Go. Okay, the first slide up here before you is the fiscal year 2014 proposed tentative, it was the tentative budget for the water utility fund balance. And this number right here, and I apologize that they're this small, it is tough to get this much data on a slide, but it's 8.7 million, and the number right here came from the fiscal year 2012 certified audit financial report for the city of Ogden. What you have in these two columns are the numbers that were projected to come into and out of that account, if you will, during fiscal year 2013. And so the fund balance went down, projected to go down to 8.5 million at the end of fiscal year 13, which was June 30th, 2013. These were the initial tentative numbers for fiscal year 14, and we were looking at a fund balance of 7.6 million. Those numbers changed upon the adoption of the fiscal year 14 budget. As you remember, the rate increase was included, other things were included. This number stayed the same, these two numbers stayed the same, but these numbers changed. And so that went up to 8.3 million, and this is what was adopted in the fiscal year 14 budget. Since that time, I've included a slide to include preliminary numbers, actual numbers for fiscal year 13. And what the number changes is here. And what this tells us is that revenues were a little higher than projected and expenses were a little bit lower. So it increases the fund balance here. And then I've also taken out the 1.4 million for the emergency that was discussed a little bit earlier and will be further discussed later. And so it reduces this number. And so you're looking at an adopted fund balance projection of the end of fiscal year 2014, which would be June 30th, 2014, of 8.5 million.
Ask a question about the changes in the numbers.
Okay.
Can we explain what the change was based on, was it something out of the ordinary, or was it just miscalculation?
No, it was, well, and as you know, budgets are never exact, and there will always be a little bit of change and a little bit of difference. This particular change came about because of the new meters. The city is collecting more for the water it's being used. The same amount of water is probably still being used. We're just collecting on all of it because you have better meter reads. That was a little higher than what they had projected. That's something, because of all these new meters that are being installed in the meter read equipment, that's going to level off. That's not something that's going to continue at this rate. They also reduced some of their expenditures. We've got a new water manager that is doing everything he can to get his arms around this system and work on it, make sure everything is running efficiently in the way that it needs to be. And he's really looking at every item in his budget. And he
Continue with these kind of numbers, or?
I would suspect that the revenues will level out, so that level of increase, we would see maybe a percentage of that next year, a little bit more. After that, probably not. It would be very gradual. Then you would see on the expense side, you know, I don't project what those would be. I would assume they'll meet the budget that they projected for this year. So I wouldn't guarantee that those would stay down because of the operating costs.
Okay.
That was probably more of a one-time situation. But we would hope, you know, that costs would be kept down. And then I also, like I said, took out the 1.4 million there. Any other questions on the water utility fund? Okay.
That number of days.
Pardon?
Number of days that we're keeping in that fund.
I've got a slide specific to that in just a couple seconds. Is that okay? And then I also wanted to bring up the joint resolution that Mr. Stratford discussed a few minutes ago. And this was a joint resolution of the Mayor of Ogden City and the Ogden City Council approving a utility fund management policy. And that, as I prepared these slides and I looked at the fund balances, it was this policy that was the guidance. And I wanted to be specific to this within the resolution. For the water utility, the cash on hand should not be less than 150 days at the end of each fiscal year, with the goal of increasing the number of days of cash on hand to at least 180 days and ultimately to 360 days. Now, this was obviously something that you felt strongly about or you wouldn't have put in writing. Okay, when you put something, and I appreciate that, you know what you're talking about when you put it in writing. Until you put it on paper, I don't think it exists. So, and what we're going to do now is work through some of the scenarios. And it's going to be kind of a little bit jumpy back and forth because of the questions, but we will get to all the questions on the fund balance. And we'll go through these fairly quickly. This was the original scenario presented to the council with a beginning cash balance, and this is important, of $5.9 million. The amount of the water utility bond, $13.4, the term of the bond, 30 years, and the total debt service cost of $24 million. And since then, and this was the days of cash on hand. Okay, here's that 360-day line. Here's your 150-day line, and this is how that scenario plays out. Okay, the next scenario was we've updated the beginning cash balance to the $8.5 million that you just saw, and how we got there. All of the other parameters stay the same. So let's look at the days of cash on hand. You've got a good spike in 2014, and then it levels off, and you're staying just above the 250-day mark, at least out through 2022. And I've also added debt coverage. Your optimum debt coverage that you stated in the financial plan was 1.5, and so you could see this orange line, how the coverage relates to that with the updated cash balance. The second scenario is to stay the same amount of the bond, reduce the term of a bond by 20 years, and it does change the debt service cost quite substantially. And again, here we see the days of cash on hand in graphical form and the debt coverage. So you can see it was down here, a little above here. It stays right on the line, dips a little bit below at 2015, and then moves above the line. The third scenario was to keep the term of the bond at 30 years, but reduce it to $11.6 million would be just the cost of the filter plant without any money for meters or for pipe maintenance or pipe replacement. And so you can see that the debt service cost on this is a little over $21 million. And I've got a slide that summarizes all of these if you don't remember all the numbers. And again, we look at the days of cash on hand. And here was that goal up here, and this is where this one stays. It's a little bit below the 250 days. And here's the coverage line, and it stays above the coverage line.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If we don't have the money for the meters or pipe replacements, is that part of our CIP for the city, or do we have to budget that, or how is that taken care of?
That would have to come out of the cash on hand. Yes, it would not be money that was taken from the general CIP fund.
Okay.
Unless prescribed. Let's see. Okay, the last scenario would be to reduce both the amount of the water utility bond to $11 million, and then reduce the term of the bond 20 years, and that puts the total debt service cost $17.7 million. And here is the days of cash on hand for that scenario. Again, here's this top line. It spikes, at 2014, and then it moves right around the 200-day mark, but it does stay above 150. And here's your debt coverage slide. And it does stay above the 1.5.
If we don't have the funds, or if we don't have the funds in the bond to do the meters or the pipe replacement, and we have to use the cash on hand,
yes,
would that affect this scenario here?
Yes,
then?
it could. And we can look at those a little bit later and see how that works out.
Okay.
And see if you can look at those, but those are good questions. And what I did here is to put together a summary so you can look at the original, the beginning cash, the amount of the bonds, the term of the bonds, and the total cost of the debt. So this summarizes those scenarios that we just went through very, very quickly.
So Lori, just go back to that slide just for a minute, just for my own clarification. Then scenario number 2, for example, includes the water meters and the pipe.
Yes.
It's a 20-year debt.
Yes.
Which meets one of our goals of trying to limit the number of years we're in debt. but it meets the needs of what we're trying to do for the whole system.
It would meet the plan needs of covering all the CIP.
According to the master plan.
Yes, according to the master plan, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, there were also questions, and we'll go back to all of the days of cash on hand in just a second. There were questions about the sewer utility, storm, and sanitary, because those funds are combined in some documents and separated in others, which does make it a little bit confusing. This was presented with the fiscal year tentative budget that showed a projected fund balance of over $14 million. This includes both the storm and the sanitary sewer. And what I've done is broken this out to just include the storm sewer only, and the fund balance would be a little over $5 million for that portion of the fund. Again, we use CAFR numbers, projected numbers for fiscal year 2013, and projected numbers for fiscal year 14 as well on those. Okay, days of cash on hand, required cash. According to the policy with the joint resolution, and this is what 150 days of cash would be for the Water Utility Fund based on the fiscal year 2014 document within the master plan, in the financial plan. Here's the 180 days, 6.3 million, which is the number that we're looking at and using as a guide. And then here would be, if you had a full 360 days, obviously it would be over $12 million. Here is what it is for 360 days for storm sewer and 7.3 million for sanitary sewer. If you took the total, 180 days for water, 360 for storm sewer, 360 for sanitary sewer, and added those together, your total required cash on hand would be $17 million. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about what's the optimum number, what would it cost, what could it cost? And you're right, nobody has a crystal ball on that. No one can project that. But I think you need to look at the value of your systems and the importance of them. Excuse me, there are certain things, if it breaks at my house, it's an inconvenience, but it's not a big deal. If the water doesn't turn on in anyone's house, it's a really big deal. So I think you kind of have to weigh those things out. This is a big decision. This is a very important thing that the council has to look at and balance. I don't believe there is the perfect industry standard. I thought about this long and hard. Councilmember Gottnauer brought this up, and I thought about calling a bunch of cities, people that I know in other communities. And I thought, well, that city, as Mr. Stratford explained, is brand new. I know their infrastructure is brand new where I used to work. They're not going to need the amount of cash on hand. You've got other cities that are aging, but maybe their other systems are better. Maybe they have, and I did talk to a friend of mine in another community with an aging system, and he said, I try and maintain, a certain percentage of the fund. But he said, I'll only let this fund go to here because I know we have another fund that's very, very healthy and we could borrow from if we needed to. And when I speak to borrowing between enterprise funds, it's not a simple transfer. It's not paperwork. It's something that has to become before you publicly and be done. Because enterprise funds were set up to stand alone, to value your enterprise and to assess the value of the system, because an enterprise fund is expected to pay for itself. It charges users fees for goods or services, and you want to be able to say this system pays for itself or it does not. And that's why you see the separation. Could their money be borrowed between the funds? Yes, there could. It would have to go through a very public and systematic process. And it would have to have terms prescribed, documents brought up, and everything as if it was loaning just any kind of a normal loan documents. And that's set out by state code.
Can I ask another question with respects to the bonding, though? This is more of a general question. But, where we bonded 5 years ago for whatever it was, 40 million?
49 million.
Yeah, 49 million. And we're proposing, this bond now. At what point do we say, well, I guess we're done bonding because we've really covered all the big things now, and we can start to cover our own stuff with cash, and we can start to, make sure that our infrastructure has a fund balance so that we don't have to bond in the future. I mean, that's probably my biggest concern is if we just keep piling on the bonds, boy, you eventually dig yourself a
Well,
hole.
you absolutely can only go so far. There is a ceiling that you would have to hit, and you would only be allowed to borrow at a certain level. You're just not going to be able to get investors that would buy those bonds if you're too in debt.
How close are we to that?
It's going to depend on this cash hand and your ability to repay the bond. That's why that time those lines over time.
Well, it affects rates also.
Yes, but if you look at your master plan, it has built in those bonds when they're due, when they're part of the plan, and then it is expected that the system will start to take care of itself and that you will pay cash for your upcoming improvements and that you will get these big things out of the way. And I know it seems onerous, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do or what to vote or how to do it, and I don't have the familiarity with your plan and the system that others do. But just in general, you're right. There is a debt load that you've got to reach a ceiling that you couldn't keep on putting on more debt. I don't believe that this plan does that. So that is the challenge, is when is the right time to bond, and that's why you put together a plan, and and that's why it's important to update the plan that is being talked about.
I think it's probably safe to say that in decades past, probably the fiscal decisions weren't the greatest. We didn't put money away like we should have done to cover these expenses that we're now suffering. We don't want to find ourselves in that in the future, but we can't kill ourselves to do it. And so the balance is how do you find that?
And it's tough, and there is no perfect answer. It'd be nice to say there's a perfect formula. And if I apply this factor and this factor, I'm going to get this result, and I'll know exactly how much to bond for, and I'll know exactly. And, that's where collectively, that's why there's 7 of you, not 1 or 2, to make that decision. And all we can do is provide you with information and answer your questions to the best of our ability. And then that decision does rest on your shoulders. I do firmly believe that most communities in the past have let the systems disintegrate, if you will. These are tough decisions to make. They're tough ones to do. And so then when you try and play catch up, and there's always a tipping point, be it the infrastructure in disintegration or be it the debt load. And you have to make sure you you're not hitting those tipping points at either level.
There's one other question that pops into my mind. 3 weeks ago when Laura Lewis was talking about, Ben Bernanke's going to come out and he's going to say something. We don't know what he's going to say, but we think it's going to be that the rates are going to go up, and I think that's what the whole country is probably expecting. Those rates that may affect our interest rate. That's why we're kind of hurrying with this thing, is to try to beat that. But as rates go up, they don't go up just for the borrowers. They also go up for those who are investing. And so the money that we have on cash on hand, where we were told that we were getting somewhere between 3/4 and 1.5%, is our money in a position to where we could move it to get better rates?
City funds are very, very, it's very limited what you can do with city funds. Would we expect those to react eventually? But it would not be overnight. That would take, I would believe, some time before the kinds of funds that we can invest in and the things that we can do, they would probably be the slowest to react. And they are the safest. That's why the cities, and they should be that way. So you could see a little bit more return, but I think that would be slow. I think there's a couple of reasons why the administration would like to see this bond put through. Number one, we do want to take advantage of the best rates possible, and we're relying on our financial advisors to advise us on that, and we follow we're taking their advice on that. Also, I do know that they're concerned in getting this filtration plant done in a timely manner, and so there's timing issues of getting it out to bid and getting it done in a timely manner as well.
I also agree with Councilman Heyer that I would like to pay cash for it. That's the ultimate dream. And as you look through these numbers that you presented, how healthy is our water department? How healthy is our storm and sanitation funds as you went through them? If you were saying, well, they're on deathbed or they're moving ahead in a productive manner, but how healthy are these funds that you've presented?
I couldn't have provided a better segue to the next slide myself.
Oh,
so
okay.
I think you scripted that. Okay. What we have here is the required cash on hand versus projected cash on hand. So you can compare the two things that you're just speaking to. Okay, in the water utility, we're saying for 180 days, it's $6.3 million. Too high, too low, I don't know. But that's what, according to the financial principles resolution that you've passed, we're projecting at the end of fiscal year 2014 to have 8.5. So we're moving ahead. That would mean there's a difference of 2.1 million. The proposed bond amount, however, is 13.4. So if you thought, even if I could come up with 2.2 million extra every year, divided into 13 million, 6 years, do you see what I mean? And that's addressing some pipe and meters, okay, within that amount. We also heard Mr. Stratford say that over 10 years, there's $46 million in needs amongst these three funds. So we need to keep that in perspective. And you can also see dollars, 3.2 million for storm sewer. We're projecting to have a little over 5. 7.3 in sanitary sewer, and 9.7. So if you look at those, yes, your funds are moving ahead. They're looking good, in my opinion. Much better than the alternative of not having those fund balances. And so I've added, given a total of 6.4 is the difference of projections. Again, projection can change. If revenues aren't as high as we've projected, those kinds of things. The storm sewer bond is this amount. So you're looking at 17.9 in proposed bond amount. You do have 6.4 that we're projecting to be additional fund balance that could be used to move ahead, take care of some of those other needs, and keep from bonding in the future. That would be the key, to pay cash on hand. Any questions on this, so you can see the dollars and numbers with these? And the last slide that I want to present is this cost of issuance fees. Exactly, these are the costs. These two numbers are still undetermined if they will have to be done. This is the worst case scenario, if you will, of the cost of issuance for those bonds. You can see that some of those are percentages. Some are based on per thousand costs, and some are fixed fees. Any questions? And that's all I had.
So before Ms. Lewis makes any presentations, I don't know if you have any questions for water utility in particular, or sewer utility, storm sewer utility in particular. There is just one or two statements I'd like to make if you don't have questions for those individuals. So as I mentioned, the council staff asked that I kind of present the overview, but the administration has also asked that I provide you with their recommendation. And I didn't want to give you that recommendation until you'd seen what your options were. And I also want to preface it with maybe two statements. First of all, as you can see from that last slide, and if we respect the differences between each of the funds, which we're obligated to do, that even though there's a big chunk of money, $17 million potentially in cash on hand, that you have to respect how that money is allocated between the different utilities. Neither the water department has enough funds to pay for the water treatment plant, let alone the other things that it's trying to do, nor does the storm sewer utility have the money to pay for the significant project that it's looking to do, which is the Harrison storm drain. That Harrison storm drain is actually about $5.5 million, and the bond is only $4.5. So a storm drain is actually going to obviously be dipping into some of its excess cash on hand to do that project, even with the bond. And in fact, the water department has a great presentation, but given time, I don't know that they have time to really present it to you about the problems they're having with leaks throughout the city. They've tracked leaks, and in the last fiscal year have had over 300, I'm sorry, I doubled the number, 300 leaks throughout the city that they have to spend money to fix. And as they're evaluating the information, they are trying to figure out, okay, what are the primary lines that we need to go out and fix, which aren't even tied to fire flow, pressure, or the treatment plant. And in fact, you can make a pretty good argument that the water department can make a pretty good argument that you should bond for the full $13 million and dip into some of your reserve funds to start fixing those problems today, because that also represents revenue loss to the system. Every one of those breaks not only costs money to fix, but also loses water to the system. Now, nobody's actually, at this point, I don't think, that hasn't yet been presented to you as an option, but that is a real situation that has as much validity as the others do, as you try to weigh in your own mind, what should we be doing here? And before I give you the recommendation, there's just one other thing I want you to be aware of, and that is a case that came out of the Utah Court of Appeals last year. And I'll try to summarize it as quickly as possible. But in 2002, a 45-year-old pipe that had a life expectancy of 40 to 70 years down in Salt Lake County was identified for replacement, but the water entity did not recommend that it be replaced at that time due to funding limitations. And so it was just barely at the beginning of that kind of life expectancy curve. In 2006, the pipe was recommended to be replaced. Well, in the meantime, the pipe had actually ruptured and leaked once and flooded somebody's house. While they were doing the work in 2006, the pipe ruptured again, flooded the same property. And the owners of the property then sued the utility and said, look, because this was on your list and because you didn't do anything about it, you have a special obligation to protect me that you didn't live up to, and you were negligent, and therefore I'm entitled to damages. Ordinarily, the government has a defense called the public duty defense, which is that we can't always identify who we should give a public duty to. But the courts have said, well, if you can identify somebody in particular that you know is relying on you and you've made some kind of commitment to them, then that can be waived, and then you can have liability. And the Utah Court of Appeals said, well, these people lived close to the line, and you knew that it needed to be replaced, and you just put it off. Therefore, we find that that is waived in this case. And there's a certain amount of risk associated with how long we choose to live with deteriorating infrastructure and how much we really want to take that chance. And that's on appeal to the Supreme Court. That might change and get addressed because it's a very problematic situation for every single utility in this state. And my I actually made a mistake, Councilmember Wicks. I think that the single most expensive item of infrastructure at this point is the 36-inch water line. Which is currently under higher stress than it's ever been under before. And we don't think it's, at least the Water Department doesn't think it's in as bad a condition as a 24-inch line. But if something were to happen to that and need to be replaced, that would be a $15 million project. So again, if you're looking at the single most expensive item in infrastructure, is probably that. Finally, and this kind of leads into the administration recommendation, If you look at when we first introduced that water had $46 million in projects for the next 10 years, and storm sewer has $12 million in the next 10 years, and you look at the amounts of these bonds, the water bond represents about 28% of the available funding to do those 10 years worth of projects. That if they don't get done, we're looking at this whole idea of pushing things off. The storm sewer represents about 36% of the projects they have planned for the next 10 years. Now they'll actually probably get some more projects as they do their condition assessment, and that comes to you in the future. But it's a significant issue that as much as we would like to save money and as much as we'd like to pay out of our own pocket is really something we should not ignore. And so the administration's recommendation is option number one, the full amount of the bond and the 30-year term. And the reason for that is not some kind of devious intent to take advantage of ratepayers or to pay a lot of money to banks or to investors, but because it is consistent with the financial principles. Doesn't get you close to 360 days, but it does keep you up at a level of cash on hand that is entirely consistent with the planning. It provides the water utility with the most flexibility in being able to address potential problems and potentially accelerate some of these projects that need to be done. And oddly enough, even though it has the longest, even though it has the most amount of interest over the 30 years, it actually has the lowest annual carrying cost, the lowest annual finance cost, which means that they have a little bit more money on an annual basis to address their problems, even though long term it would result in a total higher interest payment. So that's the administration's recommendation. Of course, it's up to you to determine what you want to do. If you have any questions for me, otherwise I'll turn the time over to Laura Lewis, and I don't know if Blake Wade is going to say anything or not, but to Laura Lewis.
You have had a wealth of information to digest and remember. A couple of points that may be of interest to you. While I was sitting back there, I did pull up the rating report on your $49 million issue. Your underlying rating, if you're just to pull the official statement, it says AAA/A2. Underlying rating is the A2 portion of that. The AAA was secured by obtaining municipal bond insurance. It was worth AAA. All but one of the municipal bond insurers no longer has AAA rating. What's really important to the market today really is that underlying rating, and they focus very heavily on that. That underlying rating of A2, just by way of quick reminder, you have AAA, AA, single A, and triple B. Anything in those categories is considered investment grade rated. And then within each of those categories, depending upon the rating agency, some look at it like your grades in high school, some do the A+, regular A, and A-. Moody's, which is the one that rates your bonds, does A1 is better than A2, which is better than A3 within those categories. So your bonds were rated A2, and they did note, if I can pull this back up quickly, my battery is about to die. This isn't the only thing they look at. Please understand, I'm not trying to lead you to that impression. They look at your demographics. They look how many new water connections and what kind of growth you have and the age of your system. And so they look at many things. But in their little blurb summary, they indicate this. I'll read the sentence incomplete, and we can discuss that as you like. The A2 water and sewer rating reflects slow but stable customer growth, narrow cash levels, and low debt levels. So if you just pick this up, and this sort of their summary, and then they go into detail about a bunch of those things and about your unemployment rate and all kinds of things. So it's clear that they focused on your, and I quote, narrow cash levels and low debt. And you said, oh, but we've now added debt, which you have. This was written with them knowing that, and when they wrote it, we were estimating it might be as much as $52 million in debt. You've since paid some of that down, and when we presented to them, we talked about the capital finance plan and that the water treatment plant would be coming up. They always ask you the question, what do you expect to issue in the next 3 to 5 years? To get at your crystal ball. So it is something that they do focus on of those levels. The other thing I was doing when I was back there is I quickly pulled up Salt Lake City's audit, and without the understand it was here while many things were going on. My quick analysis of of Salt Lake City's water fund cash on hand. I didn't look at water and sewer combined. I could only do so much in a little amount of time. My quick analysis is that they have about 205 days cash on hand. Salt Lake City's water bonds, I believe, my colleague is their financial advisor, not me. I believe they are AA. A straight AA, they may even be AAA. But they're a higher rating category, again, it's not like they focus on that one metric and then give a rating, but certainly it's important to them when, I don't remember, I'd have to look what your days of cash on hand was when we went back in 2008, but it was significantly lower than it is today. So with that, I'm just trying to, support the concept that days cash on hand is important. It is a metric that is used as opposed to just a fixed dollar amount, and that's so that they can sort of size, system A is different than system B, based on the size of the city and how many water tanks you have or how many users you have. So that is a pretty consistent metric. So the resolution you have before you tonight does a couple of things. It sets a date for a public hearing relative to the bond issue. It sets a pricing committee, and it sets the maximum parameters under which these bonds can be issued. You have the full authority to change those parameters as you make the motion, if you so choose. That's entirely up to you. I would caution you in dialing down the interest rate component. I don't think that's something that's of hot topic, but we've set a maximum interest rate of 6%, and while I don't expect that to be what we hit, we have seen interest rates go up. I just am begging for them to stop going up. In about the last 6 weeks, they've gone up almost a full percent, and that's a little painful for issuers in the market. And just completed a transaction today that was priced a roughly 28-year, I'm trying to pull it up here, a 28-year AA rated sales and franchise tax revenue bond for the city of Riverton. And my computer's scrolling. The true interest cost on that transaction was 4.878. The interest rate parameter is also used to set the maximum, like a coupon structure in the bonds, and we're seeing a lot of 5% coupons. It's been pretty common for a significant amount of time. I did on a pricing we did about 3 weeks ago. We did have 5 1/4 coupons, so that interest rate maximum has to cover that as well. So again, I expect to come in well below that, but if you're going to dial down, give us some flexibility on that, or else we have to come do this fun all over again. So with that, your pricing committee is stated on page 3 in the last whereas clause before the now therefore clause. Is that what you call that, Blake? I'm sure he loves my massacring of the legalese. We have to have at least 4 of the following 6 members participate in that pricing call and to give final approval. If you set these parameters or however you dial those down, the mayor, let me see here, get my reading glasses in the right place. The mayor or mayor pro tem, the management services director, the chair and vice chair of the council or their designees, the council's executive director or his designee, and the treasurer of Ogden. It does provide that at least 2 of those designated officers shall be from the chair or vice chair of the council or their designees. So just to know that you will have representation there. And again, the representation would have to still be, it has to be within those parameters. That group does not have the ability to say, oh, you're at 6.01%, go ahead, it's close enough. I mean, it really is a hard fast. If it is not below 6%, if it is not below, we set 35 years here to give us some wiggle room if needed. And, interesting from a wiggle room perspective, when we did the Riverton transaction, we expected their bonds to be 25 years. As interest rates climbed a little bit and they looked at their cash flows that they had identified to pay that debt, they said, we really need a little bit of give in those early years, so they wanted that debt extended. And had I dialed that parameter right down to 25 years, we wouldn't have had that flexibility. So from my perspective, the parameter sets gives us some wiggle room and sets the high bar, which we cannot cross. We have the, backup of having to get the approval of a majority of the pricing committee members. And I'm trying to think, have I missed anything, Blake? Yes? No? Got it? I got it? Okay. All right, with that is the resolution that is before you. I'm happy to answer questions, and there you go.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Laura, I know we've talked a lot about cash reserves, but I'm going to hit you up for a little bit more talk. So I was looking back at the graph that came out with the study last year, and I know we talked about 150 days minimum and, the ideal of 360, and the graph that's in with the pack, kind of issued last year, talks about, it just projects 150 days out to 2022.
Right.
And I mean, I hear there are lots of arguments for more, da, 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 da. If that's kind of what we maintain during that time, does it make one of these scenarios work better than another?
If your goal is to hit, I mean, I don't know if you, I'm not privy necessarily to every graph that you've seen. We looked at different scenarios along with your staff. And if you spend down too much cash, because the days cash on hand, is roughly 200 days. Cody would kill me for not knowing that exact number right now. But if you draw that down, you must remember that you have additional capital projects that are out there that it's planned that you'll spend that cash. So, the graphs that I looked at, sort of peaked, but now they're going to start declining. And again, to give you some sense of the impact of your rating differential from a straight A rating right now to a double A rating is approximately 0.5%. And those spreads are widening as interest rates climb. Then people sort of, do the more or yield reach, and what do they point to? Oh, that's not rated as high as that, or whatever. So, it's real money to have a good rating. It's real money to, have the kind of cash on hand. So, if I were looking, if you said to me, okay, we've heard what, the recommendation is, I agree with that recommendation. If you said to me, oh, that's nice, but if you had to pick your second choice, what would it be? My second choice would probably be to dial back the number of years of the debt. It gives you the flexibility to still have the debt out there. If you needed another bond, we could always wrap it around this existing one in terms of its repayment. And, the reason I like dialing the time down, if I had to choose option number 2, would be that it affords you lower interest rates because you're on the lower end of the yield curve. So you still get some of the flexibility of having, the debt issue and not drawing down your cash. It does leave you with higher payments, which further draws down that cash over time. But it does put you on the lower end of the yield curve. I mean, there's that. So if I had to go to option number 2, if you may not have been asking that, I may be saying what I shouldn't, but that would be my option number 2.
Okay, so follow up to that, and it's not an option on there, but what if it was sort of meeting halfway and there was option X that was split the difference and was 25 years?
I think that would be very, very viable and reasonable.
Very reasonable, okay. Can I ask you one more question?
So it sounds like I don't have a limit. You don't have a question limit.
No question limit. Phew. Okay, so with the bonds, do you have to answer the question, what do we expect to issue in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yes, I do.
So I actually don't know what is the answer to that question.
I don't know yet either. That will be answered in conjunction with your staff. My sense is that some of those projects will be paid for by cash, but it looks like Mr. Johnson has an answer.
I think our hope is to not have to bond in the next 3 to 5 years. The only variable is that we have an 80-year-old line coming down the canyon that we've realized its weaknesses as we've pushed its limits, since it's our only supply feed right now to the city with water. So that's our only concern, and we haven't really had time to evaluate how bad it is getting until we can ratchet it down a little bit and take a look. So that would probably be the only outstanding thing. Whether we could pay for with outstanding cash or not, we don't know. It's not something we've sat down and gone through. But our hope is to start churning through these projects with the cash on hand. And, to give an example, Mark didn't give an example. A few weeks ago, they closed a fire hydrant, and it caused 9 different leaks in one road segment. Our water crew worked for 14 hours over the weekend to fix those leaks. It would have been cheaper probably had we known it was going to happen to replace the line. We have old infrastructure, and we just don't know. We need the cash on hand to be able to take care of those things, and they're expensive. to fix, there's North Monroe that needs to be fixed. There's 1100 North that needs to be fixed. There's several lines we know are so old, and the map we saw today, it was amazing of just the major lines, not even the smaller lines that we spend a lot of time on. Water crew is required to tell us of any major leak repairs they do each day. Every day we get at least one water main break, every single day. And this isn't even the season where we should be getting them. So I think that tells you the infrastructure is aging, and we know we're going to have to spend some money to replace a lot of these water lines that are too old. We're relying on an 80-year-old line in the canyon. That doesn't make me sleep well at night. But it's a lot newer than the 102-year-old line that we're just trying to replace. So, I mean, the reality is the reality, and neglect. Former councils way back when, I think, neglected.
That would be you.
Well, it was probably me. But back in the 80s, we didn't raise the water rates at all. And there's been many years where it just was allowed to deteriorate, and we're paying for that now, and we're sorry that we're having to. But like I said, you ought to hear the calls we get when water isn't working well in any part of the city. It is evident to us, and sewer is just as important. We get as many calls on sewer as we do water. That's a long answer for a short question.
Okay, so I have a follow-up to the follow-up. So if we do these bonds, what % of our system has then been upgraded? I mean, are we like at a halfway mark? Or?
I hope you're not looking at me.
I don't think we're halfway. We're more than halfway of our major our major systems. For example, our water tanks, the treatment plant, the major infrastructure. We're probably more than halfway. But as far as the pipe in the ground, we're nowhere near half. We're probably well south of 20%. 6%. We're on the lines in the ground, and that's a substantial amount of money to replace those. If you talk about having to dig up the street, replace the line, put the street back, I mean, you're talking about a lot of manpower, a lot of work, a lot of expense. So.
I was just going to say, maybe it would be helpful to keep our citizens abreast of where we are and how much of the system has been replaced and how much further we have to go.
We will try and make sure that takes place in the next water report from our water manager that goes out in the water bill. That's a great suggestion.
When I had the floor, I failed to let you know that the parameters as stated currently in the resolution are par amount of the bonds not to exceed $15.5 million, not to mature more than 35. I did mention that. I did mention the 6% and the maximum discount of 3%, or a total dollar price of 97%.
Laura, I was going to mention this, but Caitlin touched on many of the points I wanted to make, and it was, primarily focusing on the total cost of debt. One of our guiding principles that we adopted was to seek the lowest amount of debt, and if we do have to, use money to fix and repair capital expenses. So my question was almost identical to Caitlin's, of the difference between the 20 years and the 30 years where we do fix all the things that we are suggesting, but what would be, what amount would that be for a total cost of debt if it was 25 years? And I know you can't figure that out right now, but.
No, I can't. But one thing we did look at in my office, I asked Cody to run some numbers for me, he and his staff. And I was curious about the difference between shortening up the debt or using cash. I think he used $2.5 million, $2 to $2.5 million, to decrease the par amount of the bonds and keep them at 30 years. Interestingly, if you issue more in principal and shorten the debt, it's a greater savings. I mean, it's close, candidly, but it's a slightly greater savings than decreasing the principal amount of the debt because, again, that yield curve rises, and it rises pretty steep. Just to give you order of magnitude, my laptop, the battery's going, well, I'm about dead, but the yield on a 1 and 2 year piece of paper right now for Riverton was like in the 173, 182. The yield on the long bond was a 495. So it goes up, pretty quick, that yield curve climb. So if you can come, down, down that yield curve, it's a significant help, and it will provide a significant reduction in your rates. And the longer term bonds are harder to sell. I mean, that's where, the underwriters, we had a team of 2 underwriters on the transaction today. And, even with that, and we're not talking, Joe's underwriting company. These are big national name firms. And, and with 2 of them working it hard, the 2039 maturity, we had 0 orders in that maturity. So the longer bonds are harder to sell. What does that mean? You got to, ratchet up your interest rate. So that's why there's benefit if you're going to do something other than what has been recommended. Then I would suggest dialing that length of maturity down.
So you're saying 25 years is what you're saying?
Or 20.
But doesn't that increase the payment for the bond? So
Yes,
that lessens
ma'am.
the amount of money we have to spend on infrastructure?
Yep, there's a bit of a circular equation there. That's exactly right.
Takeaway
Yep,
is the
that's
cash on
exactly
hand
right.
to fix
For
projects.
cash on hand.
Currently know we need.
But
you got it.
You use the money that you would have paid for interest, maybe 4 projects. And I think, these questions kind of are a symptom of,
5.4 million.
I think we had 1 work session on this. We had 1 option presented to us. We've now had 4 options presented to us. We, as a council, have not met to have a work session, to have further discussion regarding this. We had small group meetings. I don't agree with those. I don't think that's an appropriate way to do the public's business. I think we need further discussion about the options on the table.
Well, I think we also have to balance that with the pending boost in interest rates at the end of August. And, that's going to cost taxpayers more money in the long run if the interest rates go up.
If they go up. This is the only thing we do that it's one of the few things we do that binds future councils for 20 to 30 years. And I think we need to get it right. And, rates for Ogden City utility customers have gone up substantially over the past few years. And, all of these decisions have a bearing on that.
This bonding will not affect the rates that we currently have, though, is that
No,
true?
this was planned.
This was planned, so this is, the
Was
rates
within
are
your
staying
plan.
the same, except for
Yes.
the increment we will receive next year like we did this year.
Right.
1 point whatever, I'm sorry, I don't know the number, but
Right, there was a scheduled sort of inflator and tied to
You're
CPI
next.
and whatever, yes.
So the information you gave us is that a 30-year long-term bond is difficult to sell on the market today.
The longer bonds are higher interest rate. We were able to find a buyer for the Riverton bonds. They raised the yield by 5 basis points in order to attract that buyer. So they're out there. It's just that you will pay, again, because of that, it's a yield curve issue. So, the yield curve is very steep right now. So if you're looking to adjust, that's a driving element among a majority of you, then that would be the most reasonable thing in my mind.
To follow up with Councilmember Wick's comment then, if we, and maybe she's leaning this way, but if it was the 25 years, ideally I'm looking at this and saying the 20-year bond is a $3.8 million savings over the cost of the debt, but it does make us use more of the cash on hand.
And one thing that I maybe should have pointed out, I'm maybe stating the obvious, but whatever you set as parameters, that doesn't mean that I'm going to march out and do 35 years and 6%. I mean, that's the maximum. So, we could utilize the time between now and your public hearing to provide you additional analytics, and you could, direct the chair and vice chair that would sit on the pricing committee of, okay, notwithstanding, I mean, if you choose in 2 weeks to dial your debt back to 20 years or decrease the par amount, it still fits within this parameter. What this does is allow you to set a public hearing to keep us moving, toward the goal line. So maybe there's some benefit in that. Again, this just states the maximum. You could, decide collectively, howsoever you want that, okay, this is a maximum, but we want to see 10 different scenarios run. And when you see them, you'll decide you want to, use some cash and decrease the par and keep it at 30 years. Or, there's a 100 different machinations that you could arrive at. As long as it is lower than this principal amount, shorter than these years, less than this interest rate, then this would cover it all. Know that this will be what will be published when the hearing, in order to set the hearing. So if that's gonna cause you some concern in regard to, considering this tonight, you need to be aware of that. But as long as it's below that, this doesn't even bind you to issue the debt.
I do appreciate that, because I think that's a valid point. And I think that's where we need to work more on, getting those parameters. I mean, you've already said, we've established the parameters in what we're talking about tonight for the public hearing. But we really need to, as a council, to dial that down and say, what are we comfortable with?
Right. And I think your hearing is scheduled for August 20th, if I recall correctly.
And so over the next 2 weeks, that's where we just really need to focus.
So if we wanted to have more scenarios run, are you just
the person to do that?
Do we need to say we want 10 scenarios, or we want to say give us
some direction? Yes.
I don't know how many we want. I think you need to tell us what's reasonable.
I certainly would advise that you try to maintain, since you've hit the target of the 180 days cash, I would, as passionately as I could implore you to not dip below that, no matter what you do. You were reminded that the ultimate goal was to exceed in this fund, to hit 300 days. So, part of me wants to say, you should be like, woohoo, look, we're, on our way to better fiscal health. We'll have the cash in the future to, once we get all the pipe replaced, we'll be able to maintain that in a better fashion than has been done for 82 years or something. So, I would, sort of passionately implore you not to draw that cash down too much, not to go back to the bare minimum of 150 days. I don't know what that dollar amount is, but that is something that can be arrived at. And with that, I would, kind of use that as your guiding principle of, okay, we want to get to 300 because it is going to, be something as Mark stated. If you set here's our goals and objectives, and then you summarily ignore them, that does not communicate good things on many levels, certainly to the rating agencies. So, that would, I would sort of guide how many scenarios you want to see around that as sort of what I would view as a worst case scenario.
So maybe we want scenarios that adhere to our guiding principles.
I think you already have that.
We already have that.
And as
so
a compromise,
unless there's that wiggle room of the 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very comfortable with what you're proposing, Caitlin, or just suggesting.
Okay.
That we look at a 20 to 25 year, we decrease it. It makes it more marketable. We use some cash on hand, and we decrease the debt, the total amount.
Do you want to do that after you adopt this, or do you want to postpone the adoption of this?
Well, I think that's part of this
The goal
parameter,
is to ask
isn't
the
it?
question.
Adopt tonight. And
Adopt,
then-
but make those adjustments.
And make those adjustments first.
Okay.
So, if we're comfortable, then I would go ahead and just make a motion that we do adopt Resolution 2013-19 with option 1 offering some other scenarios. and the possibility of going to 25 years.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to adopt proposed resolution 2013-19 from Councilmember Gochner, with option 1 and maybe exploring the idea of 25 years, and a second from Councilmember Van Hoosier. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer?
Can I interrupt? Can I suggest you have further discussion, just in case other council members have?
Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with the full amount. You know, I think maybe, you know, the water treatment plant is necessary, and that's not something that we can fund, but I think, you know, the funds, I think, will be healthy. And, you know, our model's not always correct. We have had some increased funds that have come in. And I think maybe the more reasonable option in my eyes is to look at just the 11.6 million bond.
And Councilmember Wicks, I guess along with that too, many times, you know, and we've seen it recently, part of the criticism is not addressing the needs that we already know are going to be there. So we know that there's needs for pipe, and we know there's needs for the meters, and we've seen that the meters have been very valuable. And so I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying let's be
Well, I think
prudent
I think that is being prudent. I mean, I'm not saying ignore all those other things. I think we can plug away at those other things and, you know, come up with a way where we can respond to pressing issues and address them, but not bond for the full $13.4 million.
And my feeling is that I'm leaving the council this year, so you'll have to make that big decision. But the issue for me is if we don't keep going forward with this, we will have invested taxpayers however many millions of dollars, and we haven't accomplished anything. And I personally have been working on this for 6 years. Some of you the same. And we've gone through all this process, and it just seems to me like if we're rolling forward and these needs need to be met, then we're going to protect future generations. I'll be dead by the time this bond is finished in 30 years, I'm sure of it. But it just seems like we can't afford to keep our water system in jeopardy. And that's what I think we're doing when we're trying to be economically feasible, and I get that. But I think if we don't take the steps to move this forward the way we've talked about and planned, then why bother with the treatment plant? I mean, put it off for another 5 years, and then nobody will have water. And if you have a city you don't have a city. This is critical, in my opinion. This is absolutely critical that we move this forward.
I wasn't suggesting that we put the water treatment plant off for 5 years.
No,
I think
I
that's a
understand
pressing
that.
need.
But
I think
it's
the
the
other
other
things
things.
they're smaller dollar amounts. There's not a huge price tag. And I think there's a way to reasonably go about doing them that's not going to put our citizens in debt for the next 20 to 30 years.
If we knew the price tag, then we would all have a magic ball, but we don't. You know, we're laboring under the idea that that water line's going to last for another 20 years, and it's already 80 years old. And if we don't start getting reserves together that can help function and pay for some of those things, that's, you know, I just think we're really negligent in not providing a sound system for future generations. And how we go about that is to finish a treatment plant, pay for what's necessary, and then use the other funds to finish the projects. Because it's just too numerous. I can't get my mind about what it would cost. And I think I've heard someone say that it's almost $1 billion in needs for our water system. You've all heard that. So what are we going to do? We're just going to pay what we can pay and then hope it all sticks together. And that's my real worry. I mean, I think the only thing that's going to limit this city, it's going to limit this state, is the state of our water supply. And we know what we have found of what we've saved from the water line we've put in the canyon already. 3 million gallons. Is it a day? You know, but I mean, there's a lot to be said for that.
Well, I just think you have to balance that with, you know, what level of debt is acceptable to our residents and what utility fees are acceptable and reasonable for our residents. People's wages haven't gone up, yet your utility bills have gone up significantly.
We're not
and they will
raising
continue.
rates.
There are rate increases planned for this, and we are obligating our residents to take on this debt for 20 to 30 years. And that does not give you flexibility with future rates when you do that. You have that hanging over your head.
But we know they're only going to go up because we've already planned this, haven't we, for the next 2 years? Assuming that we would do a bond that would help us protect us from raising rates. And if we didn't do this at all, I think our rates would just be, I just don't think citizens can afford to pay the rates that would be required for the extra amount of money.
I think that, we've got a situation where we are playing catch-up. We are behind the 8 ball. And we've got to continue to do that because of decisions that have been made in the past.
Or
that
not
we can't
been
change.
made.
That we can't change that. If we choose to keep the same rate of infrastructure rebuild, it's going to cost whatever it's going to cost. One thing Mr. Stratford said that made a lot of sense to me is that, it's going to benefit people in the future, and so to bond for that is a pretty fair way to do that. If we try to do it all with cash, rates are going to go up even more for the immediate term. And that I don't think the citizens are going to tolerate very well. So I think we're probably better off bonding and keeping the rate of infrastructure rebuild so that we don't, I think that's the responsible thing to do. It just seems like it to me. It's not the popular thing to do, but the popular thing would have been to put some money away 30 years ago. But we can't do that now.
I guess I would just throw out one other suggestion. There's so much controversy around this. It just seems like another issue that we should be working on is coming up with our debt load ceiling cap. And maybe that would send a nice message to our residents.
That's a good thing to look at. I think that is something that ought to be studied a bit and reviewed and perhaps implemented in the near future. That doesn't solve it today, but
we ought to know what
that
our
is
debt
something that we are going to be looking at your request.
Yes, thank you.
But it's important for us to know where our debt level is.
Well, I think we have a motion, though.
We do.
And just to clarify, Mr. Cook, maybe you can, Councilmember Wicks has some concerns about the amount, and we can still work through that with this motion, correct?
Because we're going to get
Because
different scenarios.
We're setting a ceiling, and that allows her to, so we can still answer her concerns.
We're setting the parameters.
The parameters. Okay, so with that motion, this is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier,
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks,
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner,
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner,
Aye.
Chair Blair.
Aye, that passes. Next is storm drain revenue bond parameters. We'll go in reverse order this time.
It's sort of like Groundhog Day. So, the movie. So remember the discussion we just had? Now substitute it with storm sewer, and I'll give you the parameters are different in terms of size, but the everything else sort of remains the same. The maximum par amount will not exceed $5.5 million. In this instance, the maximum maturity is not more than 25 years, same maximum interest rate, and same discount of 3% or a $97 price. And you still have the pricing committee, you still have to hold the public hearing, everything else I do not need to regurgitate unless you want me to regurgitate it.
Any other questions or further discussion? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll look forward to your direction and what other scenarios you want run, and get that done quickly.
So with that, I'll make a motion then that we adopt proposed resolution 2013-20 and set the public hearing for August 20th.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Garner to adopt proposed resolution 2013-20, to adopt the resolution and to set the public hearing for August 20th, 2013, and a second from Councilmember Heyer. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes. Next is the emergency expenditure ratification, proposed ordinance 2013-39.
Manager will step forward, Mr. Kenton, and enlighten you.
Hope you brought pictures.
I didn't bring pictures. I should have. I actually do have pictures on my iPad. I can show them to you afterwards. But
What about pipe? Rusted
brought
pipe.
food. I should have. Chair Blair, other members of the council, it's a pleasure to be before you today. I wish it could have been with better news over something a little more upbeat than what has occurred. We had a failure, as you all know, up in the canyon on the old 24-inch line that travels from the road in the canyon up to the 23rd Street reservoirs.
Can you just speak into the mic so we can hear you a little?
Sorry.
Thank you.
This section of line that failed was scheduled for replacement. We were in the process of soliciting proposals from contractors on how to proceed with finishing this project. What happened is this is an old piece of pipe. So when you have an old piece of pipe, you want to keep it pressurized because when you take the pressure off the pipe, it wants to fail. So during the beginning of the Canyon Waterline project, the pressure was taken off the pipeline. However, as quickly as we could, we did pressurize the line back up to try and preserve it. And for the majority of the project, this line was pressurized. We had, on this morning, we opened up a valve at the gates to start flowing water through it. It was pressurized, but water wasn't flowing through this section of pipe. What we believe happened is that there was air in the line, and the air got to about a 100-year-old air valve, and the air valve that what it was supposed to do, it opened up. And when the valve opened up, the structure supporting it failed, and that sent a large volume of water down the hillside in the canyon. This resulted in a slide that closed the road in the canyon, State Route 39, and caused us to shut that line down and drain it, which is not ideal. As I said, we had to take the pressure off the line again. So the next morning, we tried to pressurize it again slowly, and when we did, it failed again. And the second time it failed, it was not at an air valve. It was actually at a pipe. It was a portion of the pipe that failed. So we shut it back down. We discussed it with the city engineer and with UDOT, and decided this pipeline was no longer going to be able to provide reliable service. The situation, where it sat above the road there, created a safety hazard, and so that line was shut down and decommissioned. So what has essentially put us in the situation of doing is relying upon the 36-inch line, which we've talked about tonight. It's an 80-year-old line. And we've been pushing huge volumes of water down it, more than it's ever seen. This has scouring velocities in it from fast-moving water that it's never seen before, and also higher pressures because the water line backs up further than it ever has before. Thus far, the line has held. There is one leak that I'm aware of on it, which seems to be stable. Doesn't seem to be getting any worse. But we do have basically all our eggs in one basket with this 36-inch line. So as a reason...
I mean, when you say it's backed up further, I'm not sure I understand that.
So when you have two lines feeding, you don't have as much demand on each individual line. So I'm going to have to explain to you the system pretty technically. I'll try and abbreviate it. Usually the 24-inch takes the bulk of our water demand, and then what is not taken down the 24 overflows into the 36. As a result of the way they're connected at the way they were previously connected at the mouth of the canyon, the 36-inch would only take the overflow water, and it would not pressurize and back up. Now, because it's the main feeder down the canyon, all the water backs up into that. The 24 is not.
It's full. That's another way of saying it. It's full now and not. Okay.
It's not acting as
partially full.
It's not acting as an overflow. It's the primary conduit for water, so that's changed.
Okay, thank you.
So as a result of this, the mayor, under the emergency powers that he has, declared an emergency, and we were able to start procuring materials and equipment to replace this line. And we're here tonight to propose to the council where that funding comes from. We are proposing that funding is taken from what would have been would have been put back in our retained earnings at the end of this fiscal year. And so the council decision is if that appropriation of funds is what they would like to do, because that is up to the council to decide.
I have a question. If it was scheduled for replacement anyway after the summer water demand season was over, how are we going to fund that replacement?
It was scheduled to be replaced in the fall, and we were waiting to see where the funds came in on the Ogden Canyon water line to determine how we were going to fund that. And so because of it, that got fast forwarded is why we're taking the funds where it is now.
Okay. So there could potentially be some funds that would have been used to fund this project that we're discussing right now for other things.
There would be, however, the funds for the Canyon water line have a lot of strings attached to them. That would cost us a lot of money if we were to mix that money with the 24-inch going up the hillside. So I'm trying to keep that separate and pay other things from the project that don't have those same requirements to try and save the city money.
Okay.
That's a great question.
So Kenton, help me. Can you kind of go through why this is an emergency versus, I mean, by the time you get this up and running, the summer water season's essentially over. So can you kind of talk about why it is an emergency versus just a regular project?
Well, the real emergency arises from we have lost basically our redundancy to 2/3 of the city. So if anything happens to the 36-inch line, we're going to be in trouble. So the volume demands are going to go down, true, but we still aren't going to have that redundancy. One of the things that's concerned me also relating to this is when our demands start to go down and if we have to turn the filter plant off, I'm concerned about how I'm going to keep pressure to the residents at the top of the canyon. Because the way the system's running now is the 24 is fed from the wells like it usually is, but that water's mixing with a 36-inch to keep the 36-inch full with the filter plant water. Well, if I lose the filter plant water, I'm still trying to fill the 36-inch line with just the wells, and it's probably not going to work, and I'm not going to be able to get the water backed up to give pressure to the residents of the canyon. So there's two things that concern me. But really the volume isn't so much the issue as the redundancy.
So how long will it take you to finish the project then?
Well, because of the emergency that was declared, we were able to go ahead and start procuring materials and services, so that's expedited things significantly for us. We're still waiting on a piece of equipment from Colorado that we think we're going to be able to get a hold of. It's like a spider excavator that goes up the hillside, and because of this emergency, we were able to try and get that ahead of time. So we anticipate it taking about 45 days to get the pipeline in commission. Now, things could go quicker, but because of, if any of you have been able to visit the hillside and seen what we're up against, it's kind of scary. So we're thinking 45 days to get the pipeline commissioned, and then it'll be probably 75 days before everything's put back together.
And you hope the 36 holds?
We do. I don't have many other options if the 36-inch goes, and that's, it keeps me, it keeps us. We all worry about that at the city because we want to give people reliable drinking water, and so we've kind of been put in a situation that's a little frightening. We don't have much of a backstop or safety net now. So,
do we have any cost savings with Whitaker Construction already being mobilized and working on a project in that area? Or
originally the original price that I received from them is because we were trying to work with them during the project to get this taken care of, and the price they originally gave us was a little bit higher. And so the price, which is counterintuitive because you think now they're like, aha, we got you under a barrel, we can take advantage of you. Whitaker's not that way. We've actually been able to work with them through finalizing the design to take some costs away. And then also because they're already on site, they're familiar with the site, there's less risk for them. So the price has actually gone down. So yes, we do have a savings with Whitaker.
Can you talk a little bit about what the current redundancy is?
Yeah, we have our feed. Originally, when we wanted to do the canyon, we wanted to have a connection from 36 to 46, and because of some things that were beyond our control, that didn't happen. And so we don't have the redundancy from the southern part of the city right now. So the southern, we still are kind of operating two different water systems, the north part of the city and the south part of the city. So the south part of the city is kind of on its own with little redundancy. And then you have the north part of the city that's dependent heavily upon the two lines that come down the canyon. We have a well up at Taylor Canyon that we constructed, which is a tiny bit of redundancy, but it really doesn't have enough flow to make up for to even dent the loss that we have from the 24 being down. So we kind of have the 36-inch feed in the north, and we have the 36-inch water line feed in the north right now, and then the 24-inch that feeds the south from Weber Basin pumps. So.
And would it be possible to let us know when you get more redundancy?
Absolutely. We'll have a big party, and I'll celebrate because I can.
We'll serve water.
Yeah, we'll serve water. So.
Water suppression.
Redundant water, yes.
Redundant
whatever that
water.
tastes like.
No, and then that's another project we're working through right now to kind of get that redundancy. But because of that combination of things, the line failing, we figured it was pressurized, it would hold, and then it didn't. And like my leak maintenance supervisor says, Kenton, we can't predict when they're going to leak. And it's like, well, they leak at the worst times, and so that's why with a 36-inch we're concerned, because it looks like it's okay, but you never know. We have one leak on it that we know of. It's in better condition than 24 is, but once we started digging up the 24, we realized how bad the 24 was, how much it was leaking, and so just a little concerned. So anyways, hopefully that answers your questions.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Mm-hmm. And any further discussion? Presentation on this earlier in this study session.
So I'll make a proposal that we adopt proposed ordinance 2013-39.
I second it.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Garner to adopt proposed ordinance 2013-39 and a second from Councilmember Stevens. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Van Hoosier.
Aye.
Councilmember Wicks.
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner.
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer.
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gardner.
Aye.
Chair Blair.
Aye, that passes. Next up are two items of new business. First is the 2013 municipal elections. Do we have the city recorder?
She is here. Excited to come to the meeting tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Council. Before you tonight is a request for the approval of a list of poll workers for the 2013 municipal primary and general election. As you know, the city contracted with Weber County to run the election, and they handle the hiring of the poll workers. They have a process whereby anybody who's interested in being a poll worker can apply online with them. They review those applications and categorize them for what they feel people, the best fit for the different positions would be for them. Poll managers are hired and used. I think their newest poll manager is participated in the last two elections for them, so they're very knowledgeable and have experience, and those people pick their teams or help hire their teams to serve the public at the polling locations. For Ogden's election, they have 13 polling locations as well as one early voting polling location. So the list includes 14 poll managers and 66 to 71 poll workers, including alternates. State law also requires that the legislative body and mayor serve as the board of municipal canvassers, and that this board of canvass should be held no sooner than 7 days after the election and no later than 14 days after the election. So we are requesting that the board of canvass be set as August 27th, 2013 for the primary election and November 19th for the general election. Any questions for me?
Tracy, I just have one thought. Kind of in the spirit of buying local, I mean, is there any sort of priority given to Ogden residents? Because I notice there are quite a few of those that don't reside in Ogden, and
The state law requires them to be citizens in the county, and only 4 cities are having primary elections. What they did is because Ogden is so much...
Can you speak closer to the mic, please?
Because Ogden is so much larger than the other cities, they chose their most capable, or the ones who are the poll managers who are experienced in handling large volumes. Our polling locations previously, we had 16 and we went to 13, so they'll have a higher volume. And that might be why some of them are not specifically from Ogden City.
Well, there's like whole families too, which is kind of a little concerning, where you think a variety of people would kind of help keep people honest. I mean, not that they wouldn't be, but it just is a little concerning that you have basically what appears to be one whole family running a polling location.
well, I guess, and even bigger than that for me is it's Ogden taxpayers paying for this. It seems like we ought to be employing Ogden residents if it's possible. But
We could go back and have it redone.
Or I'm maybe even for the future, maybe that's sort
Or
of,
put a preference
emphasis
on
on Ogden residents.
We can do that.
Tracy, would you touch, we decreased from 16 to 13, but what maybe for the public is the importance, we're not using schools, elementary schools anymore.
There are a couple schools, but we're trying...
James Madison, sorry.
We are trying to move away from
And Lincoln.
schools.
We've moved away from those primarily for the safety of the children, is my
Yes.
understanding. And more importantly to me is there's 3 designated voting centers where you can vote
Any
no matter
citizen-
what district you're in.
Any citizen
Or
registered
mute.
voter in Ogden City can go to any of those 3 locations if they work at a particular end of town. If they are not comfortable with the polling location they've been assigned, then they can go to one of those 3 locations.
And those 3 are the
Record.
Union Station, the Event Center, and OWATC.
Yes,
And then early voting is here.
is here, in the recorder's office.
Thank you.
Where they have those locations, how do they keep people from voting in their local residence area and one of those locations? How do they keep that from happening?
The database is online, so when
So it's
you come and
live
vote...
when you go vote? Okay,
live.
great. Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Or a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the list of poll workers for the 2013 primary and general municipal elections, and also set the date for the Board of Canvass.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Garner to accept the poll worker list and set the dates for the boards of canvass for November 19th, 2013, and a second from Councilmember Heyer. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. And next up is consideration of a cancellation of a regularly scheduled meeting for August 6, 2013.
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve the meeting cancellation from Councilmember Gochner and a second from Councilmember Heyer. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Next up is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the council regarding your concerns or ideas. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Bring this down for a short person. Okay, I have three real quick questions for the council. One, 10 years ago when I moved to Ogden, and there was an ordinance that said that people had to maintain part of the alley behind their house. And the reason I know that is my husband got a warning and several of our neighbors got tickets. Well, it's not being enforced. Several of the alleys, if there's an electrical problem, there's no way in the world Rocky Mountain is going to be able to get down that alley to fix the problem. Second question, here a couple years ago, we got a building permit to put up a rock wall because part of our backyard was falling into the alley. We were told, okay, no problem, just make sure that it does not go halfway out into the alley because building out there is not allowed. Well, if it's not allowed, why is several residents allowed to put up 12-foot fences all the way out to the middle of the alley? Concerning to me. And then had one person ask me about a concern on Tyler. During the winter time and all after the snowplows come through, students are actually parking basically in the middle of the street, so you only have one car that is able to get through there. Is there any way that something can be done so basically the 3 streets around Ogden High could be no parking from 8 to 4 so everyone can get through there? My 3 questions.
And can you just state your name and address for
Oh,
the
sorry
record?
about that. Sherry Moriali, and address is 1352 29th Street.
Thank you, Sherry.
Rebecca LaPerriere, 675 Ogden Canyon. Council members, I am before you today hoping that a solution can be reached concerning our below standard water pressure in Ogden Canyon. Kenton Moffitt's comments in the article printed by the Standard Examiner on Monday, July 22nd is correct. We residents in the canyon have lived with low water pressure for decades. However, Ogden City Water is not doing everything they can to fix the problem in a timely manner. A memorandum given to Canyon residents by Mr. Moffitt on July 16, 2012, outlined how water pressure service will change after the 24-inch line was replaced. It stated, Canyon residents will have increased water pressure. To deliver this increased pressure, a storage tank was to be built at the head of the canyon near the filter plant. This clearly has not been done. We have not seen improved service. Our pressure is lower now than before the project began. For Mr. Moffitt to say that we should have the same amount of pressure as we did before the project started is asinine. I spoke to George Benford of Horrocks Engineering, and he told me about 2 check valves and a backflow device that were installed in the 8-inch line supplying water into Wildwood Grove, which is where I live. He said the existing water pressure would only allow the check valves to open a quarter, maybe halfway. Because of these devices, we lived with water pressure at 2 psi for 11 days. The check valves were disabled, but the backflow devices was left in place. When George called back letting me know what was done, he said Ogden City Water told him that we should now have 16 psi coming into Wildwood, 24 psi below the minimum state standard. The backflow device in the 8-inch line is restricting water flow, causing worse pressure than before the project started. Mr. Moffitt speaks of building a new water treatment plant, and this should restore pressure to about 40 psi. This proclamation is ambiguous at best. There is no assurance this will happen once the project is finished. How will the new water treatment plant provide adequate pressure for Canyon residents? The treatment plant is slated to be constructed during the next year and a half. I ask each of you, would you be willing to subject yourself and your family to life without adequate water? Would you be willing to live in undesirable health conditions for the next year and a half, maybe 2, and still not know if you will have improved water pressure once the project is completed? I assure you, your answer will be an emphatic no. The decreased pressure has diminished our quality of life. The unsatisfactory service given to Canyon residents is placing us in unhealthy living conditions. How can you sell us water that does not meet state standards at twice the rate charged to other customers?
Thank
Our
you.
families cannot continue to
Thank you.
live with inadequate water service delivered by Ogden City. This is a health issue, and it needs to be addressed immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Debbie Curl, and I live at 833 Ogden Canyon. And I was unaware of what was on the agenda today when I decided to come in and talk to you, but it is regarding the water issues. My husband and I moved into Ogden Canyon in September of 2002. We have always needed a pump to create water pressure for our home because we live at the top of the canyon. The Ogden City water system consistently supplied between 5 and 8 psi during the last 10 years. Our pump was then able to grab that water and accentuate our pressure to about 30 to 50 psi. For the last 10 years, we had no problems with the system at all. Then, in May of this year, our pump failed. Our pump burned itself up because of an unannounced water outage on approximately May 29th. We did not put a new pump into the system, relying on the extremely minimal pressure that we could get from the temporary 6-inch bypass line. During that time, we only had water approximately 50% of the time. We were assured by Ogden City, Whitaker Construction, and Horrocks Engineering that once the 24-inch line was in service, everything would be okay. However, even after the 24-inch line was put into service, we have had multiple water outages, one lasting as long as 6 days, in which we had to draw water out of the river to be able to flush our toilets. The water was restored for 1 day and went out for an additional 5 days. I could go on and on about all the days that we've been out of water, all the phone calls we've made, all the phone calls that were not returned, but I would definitely exceed my 3-minute limit. Right now, we're running our pump manually, which means we can't just use water. When my husband is in the shower, I have to stand and monitor the pump. When I'm in the shower, he has to do the same. Otherwise, if our pump gets to a place where it doesn't have enough water, it will burn up. Right now, we're siphoning water out of the 24-inch line. We have 0 water pressure. 0. My husband and I have spoken with many members of the city, including Mark Johnson and Jay Louder, on July 11th. We were promised that they would set up a meeting to discuss what's going to happen because, as Rebecca referred to, we have been told by the city, so sorry, but it's going to be 1 to 2 years before you can expect any improvement. We asked for a meeting with all of the Canyon residents to let us know what to expect over the next 2 years. We have neither had a meeting set up nor had a returned phone call that was promised on July 15th. You know, I don't know what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to live for the next 2 years. I had water when I left home this morning. I don't know if I'm going to have it when I go home tonight. I'm going to ask you the same question Rebecca did. Would you guys live like this?
Thank you.
I admire you all very much as listeners. You've listened to a lot tonight. I stand before you today not as a constituent, but as a customer of Ogden City. My name is Lori Schlichting. My husband Craig and I reside at 621 Ogden Canyon and own a residence at 657 Ogden Canyon. We appreciate the opportunity to address the council. We would like to share with you our proactive attempt to improve our own water situation and where we are today in that process. In 2007, the residents of Wildwood Grove approached Ogden City Public Works to design a new water distribution system built to current code for our subdivision. In October 2007, Ogden City graciously supplied us with a set of plans which addressed our primary concern of installing a system that would facilitate any future improvements to the city water distribution system. We obtained a number of bids for the project and approached Ogden City in an effort to find a fiscal agent who would help us form a special improvement district or other funding organization to collect payment over time for our infrastructure improvements. The city declined and suggested we contact Weber County. Weber County directed us to the state of Utah. Then in 2009, we received a letter from Ogden City Public Utilities cautioning us that Ogden City was contemplating reducing the capacity or even eliminating the use of the city-owned water treatment plant, and thus offered 3 suggestions from the State Division of Drinking Water with respect to the water service in Ogden Canyon. The State Division of Drinking Water, or the DDW, advised action directed to Ogden City, directed to Weber County, and directed to themselves. We were elated when the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the 24-inch water line was announced. The first open house was held for Ogden Canyon residents and described the scope of the project as the installation of 17,000 feet of 8-inch distribution mains, service laterals to about 150 customers, which is every resident of the canyon, and a 300,000-gallon storage tank. We were shown maps with projected continuous flow laterals looping through Wildwood and other subdivisions. In 2012, we were notified that Ogden City was moving forward with the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the 24-inch water line. The notification letters stated that our services would be substantially improved through the installation of a storage tank, but we would not be receiving new laterals in our subdivision. The 24-inch water line has been replaced. Our overall volume of water has decreased. Today, our water pressure is 27% less than it was prior to the rehabilitation of the 24-inch line. We are still eager to improve our existing water distribution system. The city has told us that we're not their problem. The county has told us it's not our water system. And the State Division of Drinking Water said, well, we did what we promised. We loaned you the money. So where are your customers today? We're right back where we started in 2007.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Hello, Dan Schroeder here, 1444 Binford Street. Well, that was a nice presentation we heard today on the, well, I want to talk to you about the water bonding, and of course we've heard a lot about that tonight, and I certainly can't respond to everything we heard in more than an hour of administration presentations in 3 minutes. I did try to prepare a summary sheet here, which I've had Amy Sue distribute to you, and it addresses what I really think needs to be the central question. Why would anyone borrow $18 million at 4 or 5% interest just to maintain a much larger cash balance that's earning only about 1% interest? I'm not going to go through all the details on here, but in discussions with some of you, I've heard about 6 different reasons given, and this addresses each of those reasons. I don't think any of them holds up to scrutiny. Just to be clear, I think the amount of money we're talking about here between paying for everything with cash or going for one of the 4 options that you have before you now is somewhere between $7 and $14 million, depending on which option you choose and what the interest rate is. In other words, if you do not bond, if you pay everything with cash, you will, over the long term, save $7 to $14 million. That's taking into account the fact that your cash does earn a little bit of interest. And the uncertainty is just because of the uncertainty over the interest rates and the uncertainty over what the bond itself will look like 20 or 30 years and how much. So $7 or $14 million. I heard a lot of discussion about other infrastructure needs that we have. That's $7 to $14 million that a future council 5 or 10 years from now, not 30 years from now, but 5 or 10 years from now, could commit to other infrastructure projects. Now, if those infrastructure projects were shovel-ready today, then yeah, I could see spending your cash balance today on those and bonding for the filter plant and so on. But those infrastructures are not shovel-ready today. If they were, they would already be before you in the CIP. And so I think the limiting factor here is not so much money, because you have $27 million of cash. The limiting factor is how fast can we do the projects. And the council has already decided to prioritize the filter plant. So let's do the filter plant first, and then let's get some of these other projects online as fast as possible. I don't think anyone in the room is suggesting that we hold back on needed infrastructure projects, and I don't think it's appropriate for some people in the room to have suggested otherwise. Okay. Another thing that didn't come up during the administration presentation is that you have cash continuing to flow into your utility funds. And we saw that the retained earnings was $3.2 million for the last year in the water fund. Rates just went up another 7%. I bet it'll be $4 million of retained earnings for the current year and another $4 million for the year after that. So that's another $8 million before all the bills for that filter plant come in, because it's going to take a year and a half to build. I see my time's almost up, so I'll stop there. Thank you for all the time that you're putting in, thinking very carefully about this. It's my understanding that nothing's been finalized yet, and I hope we can continue to focus on what the real issues are before you make a final decision.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. Any other further comment? Seeing none. Comments from the mayor or administrative or chief administrative officer?
None tonight, thanks.
Okay. And comments from other council members? None?
You know, just, we do appreciate the comments from the members of and citizens of Ogden Canyon. And we'll do our best to get you some reasonable answers, and we'll work with the administration on that, so.
Okay. Next up is consideration of adjourning into a closed executive session pursuant to the provisions of Section 52-4-205. 1A of the Open and Public Meetings Law. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chair, the closed executive session is permissible for the purposes set forth in the agenda.
So with that, I would make a motion that we adjourn into a closed executive session for the reasons outlined in the agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Wicks to adjourn into a closed executive session and a second from Councilmember Heyer. This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Wicks?
Aye.
Councilmember Gochner?
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens?
Aye.
Councilmember Van Hoosier? Aye. Vice Chair Gardner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye. That passes. And
We'll adjourn from that room, yes.
Okay.